Welcome to Event Marketing Redefined. It is great to see everybody piling in for this show. I think we have a cool show for you today. So we're going to go right in. Everybody knows who Pablo is. I'm not going to introduce him. He is the producer of the show. He is a friend of mine.
We have a slide for that.
The slide for who he is. You're right. I'm forgetting that we're doing a dry run through of what we're teaching at Exhibitor. I'm so used to getting into the thing. Yeah. So anyway, Pablo and I are teaching a class at the end of the month at Exhibitor Live. The class we are teaching is how to grow social media from events and grow events from social media. Pablo is going to share the screen. We are going to take you through our actual presentation. This is a bit of a dry run for us. Give us a little bit of slack would be appreciated. We are going to kind of rumble through this thing, but we're going to give you all the good stuff here. So don't worry. One thought that I have is that we executed this and we are like, man, this is a really good strategy. We talk about it a bunch. And I think one of the things I want people to make sure they take out of this and why we are talking about this in this strategy is a couple things. And I think this is a way to meaningfully engage your customer. That is something we talk about on this show all the time, is that when you get face-to-face, you got to engage meaningfully. Engaging just to engage is a bunch of BS, right? You want to engage your customer the right way. And I think this strategy does that. It also does a lot of other things that we are going to dive into and sort of give you kind of the feature and benefit pitch, you would say, for this. So anyway,
Matt, if I could also jump in real quick.
Yeah,
right?
fire.
So that is, you're talking about the presentation itself. What we're talking about, this podcast as a trade show booth thing, is something that people can definitely adopt. Can people execute, do a lot of things. I want to just highlight the meta of it all. We're talking about meaningful engagements and how to get your clients, how to get your customer base excited. What we're doing right now, this idea that if you have somebody inside of your company and they're going to give a keynote or they're going to give some kind of like training at a conference, that you can reach out to your list, you can reach out to your clientele, you can reach out to your prospects and tell people, hey, we're giving this keynote. We want to do a special sneak preview for it. So we're going to do a webinar. Will you join us and give us some feedback? Is something that's available to everybody, right? Like everybody can do this. And if you're too nervous about it, invite your team, right? Like having your employees and your team like see you giving a presentation about why you do and why it's so smart. It's surprisingly good for like culture building and it'll really build your career if you can get people to like see you that way. So I just wanted to plant that seed for people.
Awesome. All right, let's rock and roll. We're going to go through these slides. One thing I will say, if people have Q&A, throw it in there. Go ahead. We're going to do this same style format that we always do. Pablo, hit the slides. Let's rock and roll.
Let's get on it, Matt. Why are we doing it?
So event marketers, you all are asked to do more every year with fewer resources. It always seems that's a bit of the theme. It always seems that there is this idea that these events have to get the most juice out of the fruit, yet you're given less tools. You're asked to engage the crowd. You are asked to deliver experience. You're asked to create content. You're asked to tie into the marketing. You're asked to gather data. You're asked to drive pipeline. Oh, and by the way, you're asked to pull together $250,000, $50,000, $700,000 trade show booths, events, and activations that they have to go right. They have to look good. The logistics, the planning, the coordination, all of that. So it's just a lot. It's a big ask.
It's a big ask. And you know what you are being told to do that in is a trade show booth a lot of the time, right? So does this feel familiar, right? Like this idea that you're in a fishbowl, you're standing inside.
That's Pablo's spirit animal, by the way.
Get out of here. So you're standing inside this trade show booth that you spent all this time designing, all this time organizing, all this time in sleepless nights, wondering if it's going to get built. And you're there and you're just kind of like trying to make eye contact with everybody. People are walking by. They're averting your attention to look at the swag that you're giving away, see if there's a raffle for them, see if there's like some toy that they're going to be able to throw away later and give it to their kid while you're trying to engage with people. So, you know, the beauty of what you're really trying to do is garner some attention and break that wall, right? Like get them to stop in their tracks and give them a reason to come talk to you, not to grab a notebook or whatever. So this is why we came up with this strategy.
Okay, so this is the activation that we ran at Exhibitor Live last year. This was our 10 by 20 booth. This is what we would consider a narrative-driven booth. We called this Hotel Rockway. All right. And then as you can see on the right side here, we ran a podcast activation. We ran this podcast for 3 days on the show floor. I think I talked more than I ever talked in my entire life, which is saying a lot. You know, we were nominated for Best Small Booth. We did fill our pipeline, which is kind of how we got to this point of like, we ran this play. We've talked about this play. We've talked about the ingredients of how to do this on a trade show and all the positives that come from it. So essentially here we are to deliver it to you.
Yeah. And one of the beauties of this, right? So I've been running different variations of this play since like early 2019. Obviously didn't do it in 2020, but it was really my first time doing it with Matt and doing it with Rockway and doing it with a company that really understands this like narrative driven booth experience. And that really, really tied everything together for us running this thing, right? It was just breaking past the fishbowl. It's this idea that lights, camera, and action get you to stop in your tracks and be like, "Ooh, who's on TV?" The invite in to speak to a subject matter expert is something that a sales team can say, "Oh my God, that's really interesting. You should go talk to my super smart CEO, Matt, over here about like trade show marketing," and invite them into like an intimate conversation where you have their full attention. And beyond that, 2 weeks after the trade show, when everybody's just getting emails and spams of all these different brochures or whatever people send these days, you're following up with oh, hey, by the way, that was cool. We're about to drop your podcast, your YouTube show. Can we just get on real quick and talk about like how we do your description? So it's a differentiated follow-up that people want to get to. But the magic of it was also building this narrative into the booth that then continued the conversation on the show floor, which is really, really impressive.
So let's touch. Yeah. Let me walk through people here with what. So we're talking narrative driven booth. You've heard me talk about this before. You're talking narrative, you're talking story, you're talking themes. And what I mean by that is taking your own company and saying, okay, what is the problem we solve for the customer? What is the value proposition that we offer the customer? Or I think your third option is really to say, what is our major point of view on our industry? You then turn that into a theme. You turn that into a story. You take one of those three, turn it into a theme, turn it into a story, turn it into a concept. Ours just so happened to be Hotel Rockway, a boutique. The idea was it was a boutique hotel, right? What do boutique hotels, what are they? Well, they are intentionally designed, which is what we feel like we do for our clients, and they are personalized service, right? So we basically took the problems we solve and our value proposition to our clients, and we turned it into Hotel Rockway. And the idea here was, even in a 10, I mean, this is a 10 by 30 space. It's not that big of a space. It's not some massive 40 by 40. This is a normal size inline booth, but we were still, in my opinion, able to make it a themed, narrative driven, immersive experience for our customers, where people were asking, what's Hotel Rockway? Why is your booth a hotel? Right? And then what's funny is when people ask that question, you're then able to position yourself with what you believe your value proposition and the problem you solve for somebody is. And that to me is a narrative driven approach.
Yeah. And we're going to get further into that with, I know that we've been talking a little bit more and more about that exactly on the show lately, but as far as the takeaways for this session, today you're not going to have the workbooks and stuff that you're going to walk away with, but really we want your feedback. We want to know if you walk away from this understanding this idea of developing a content POV, point of view, understanding the idea of how you incorporate narrative into your booth, understanding how you yourself can execute a podcast in a booth, and almost as important or more important than the rest of this, how you achieve actual stakeholder buy-in. Because again, you're asked to do more with less, right? So let's start with the point of view, Matt. This is something that I love how much you've bought into, man. You want to talk about the importance of this?
Yeah. Okay. So point of view is, a lot of people will work at companies where your company already has a point of view. You already have a starting point. You don't have to create a point of view. And a point of view to me is an opinion, a thought, a belief that you have on your industry, that you have on the problems in your industry, or a way of doing things. I don't know, Pablo, do you want me to dive into what ours is, or are we going to get there down the line? I don't exactly recall.
No, I think for you, it's the importance of it from the way that you see it. I'm going to dive into exactly what it is, and then you're going to talk about yours.
Okay.
But I think for you, it's this idea of like understanding the importance of differentiation in the conversation. And you also speak of it as not just the POV that I see as a category designer, but you also talk about like the hill that you die on. There's like there's like 3 different kind of elements that you speak well to.
Yeah. I mean, I think the hill that you die on type thing is like, what does your company believe? Right. I mean, people remember stories. People remember, just giving people like feature and benefit sell. It only takes you so far. People want story. They want to know your beliefs. They want to know who you are. A lot of companies, and for event marketers thinking, how do I take our point of view? Your company may already have it. Most companies do. You just have to find it. You have to sort of eke it out of your leadership, eke it out of, or it may just be incredibly obvious.
Yeah. And really what's important about it is what Matt talks about is how can it get you into a conversation, right? It can't just be like, well, we do security defense, so that's why we're here. It's something that gets you into a conversation, and there's a recipe for this thing, right? I like to explain this in the sense that you never really start a conversation with anybody. The best you can hope for is that you join a conversation that's already going on in their head. So if you're going to start a conversation with somebody, there's a recipe for the POV, and it starts with this idea of how the world is, right? Something we can all kind of agree upon, right? Like it's this idea of, hey, we can, like, you'll recognize it in how we started this thing, right? Like we can all agree upon the idea that event marketers do more with, or are asked to do more with less, right? And there's a big problem behind that. And it's just like, you all are starting to, you then get into the problem of like, yeah, but you're asked to do more with less, and then you're thrown into a fishbowl, right? Then you talk about the symptoms of the problem to get people to get buy more and more in agreement. And once people are really in agreement, now you can present this new way of doing this. Podcast is a trade show booth, right? And then if you really want to finish and close the deal, you talk about the new world as is. It reminds me of a conversation that I was having this morning with our buddy Kurt. His wife is running for a judge in a local jurisdiction in Florida, and he sent me her video getting interviewed. And the first one's like, why do you think you should be a judge? And she was awesome, right? She was like, man, I've been doing this and I've been doing that. And I'm like dynamic and all these different things. And I send it back to Kurt. I was like, think about how you could do this in a point of view. And if instead of starting off with, I've done this and I've done that, and this is what makes me great, she would have started with, hey, I see our county. This is what's happening in our county. And I see our state. This is what's happening in our state. And I see, I see the world. This is what's happening in the world. And it's because people don't trust the judicial system, right? They see these same old faces, and they see these same old ideas, and there's no trust in there. So imagine if we can just control what we can control, which is this courtroom, right? Like we can have a fresh idea, some younger people, different perspectives, maybe a woman, like somebody that's going to be here for a long time that can serve as consistency, right? This like a younger person that has a big track record. And that's what I represent here, because when I do this, blah, 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 right? Like think about how different that sounds as opposed to like, I'm young, I'm energetic, I've had great experience and whatever. Right. So
hey, Pablo, is it, so just one thought I'm having as we're walking through this here is like, when you're talking about how the world is, and the problem with it. One thing I think about when it comes to a customer, or like when we're selling to our customers and having those conversations, whether you're a judge selling yourself to a community, whatever it may be, the word that comes to my mind is empathy.
Yeah.
Because when you're creating a story and you're starting with a story of how the world is, the problems with it, there's this empathy, there's this group empathy that goes with it. And people latch to stories. They latch to things that are familiar to them. And if there's it's like, I use the example all the time. It's the same thing. When a comedian tells a joke that is super obvious and everybody cracks up laughing, it's not overly clever, right? But it's obvious. You all deal with it. It's all happened to you. The whole room laughs. And this is seemingly the same concept.
It's funny you say comedian, man, because I saw Jerry Seinfeld like a year ago and I was like, this dude's a category designer. When he's like, what's the deal with this? He's basically like showing, the world is like this and making the non-obvious obvious. But to your point, empathy, right? Like I think there's some real genius in how you designed this thing as Hotel Rockway, because it's based on your POV, right? So like maybe you can, so people can start to conceptualize and start thinking about it. You can share it.
All right. So I'm going to kind of work through this with everybody. So give me a little bit of slack here, but essentially at Rockway, our point of view on the trade show event industry, on our market, is that trade shows and events are a sales and marketing strategy. They are not a cost of doing business, which means they must be treated and executed as such. So where this stems from is me years being in the industry and working with exhibitors and our customers and just questioning so much of the stuff that goes on, because what I see is talking I hear myself years and years ago talking to customers who are spending $100,000 on a trade show booth. That doesn't include the space. That doesn't include the flights, travel, sponsorship, all that. And when I ask them why they're doing this, what are the goals? What are the objectives? It's, well, we always go, or our competitors are there, or, well, if we don't go, people will think something's wrong. That to me was just always like, I don't want to say it sounds crazy because I think that's offense. Not really crazy. I think it's actually super normal, but it doesn't make sense. It really doesn't make sense to spend all that money. That means you're treating it as a cost of doing business, which then to me stems back to why budgets get cut. It's why people say, oh, we're in a 20 by 30 this year, but we have $40,000 less. And I'm like, I don't even know where to begin, because what you were spending prior was barely enough. And we were making magic happen. So my point of view has come in the fact that some of the best companies we work with, they are dialed. They're dialed into who the customer is. They're dialed into why they're at the show. They're dialed into the objectives that they need to walk away and what those objectives achieve when it comes to pipeline, brand awareness, customer acquisition. And it just led me to thinking like, this is a hill that I want to die on. This is a hill that I want my company to die on, which is that when you work with Rockway, we believe that trade shows and events are a sales and marketing strategy, and they are not a cost of doing business. So we are going to work as if and treat them and execute them with you like a sales and marketing strategy. So all the questions, all the thought, all the work that we do will go into how do we get you results. So that's my point of view.
I love it, buddy. I thought you did pretty good there, man.
All right. It's not bad, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So everybody knows, I challenge Matt to be like, I know, we have the one-liner POV, right? But I want you to like extend this thing into the formula. And
I did text you this extremely quickly, right? You texted me and said you were just, he was testing me casually. He just hits me with a random text that he's like, hey, what do you think your real point of view is? I hit him back in 2 seconds with exactly this.
Yeah. With
but
exactly
wasn't totally flushed out, but I hit him with it.
This is a point of view, right? Like, but then when you tell the story, you got to be able to expand it that way, right? So everybody that heard that, right? Just think about what that did, how that rang in your head, right? Like, were you kind of nodding your head of just like, yeah, that is my life. This is what I've gone through. And then you're like, oh, you're right. We should do this as a cost of doing, right? So like you start going along with it, and that's way better than like, our point of view is that we build beautiful trade show booths. Right? That's not a point of view, right? So give you another example, right? My company, Be the Stage, was founded on the point of view that if you're not building a community, you're going to become a commodity. And the way that I talk about it is, 63% of small business owners believe that more than half of their business comes from word of mouth, but 80% don't have a strategy for it. That means that what they're really spending money on is look at me marketing. It's tricks for clicks. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? But the truth of the matter is that it's only getting harder and harder to get the consumer to talk to you. Studies have shown that in the 60s, the average consumer was being served 76 ads per day. By 2007, it was up to 98.5 per day. Anybody want to guess what it is now? Matt, you have a number of what it is now?
I would say more than 10x the number that you just gave.
4,000 to 10,000 ads per day. Right? 4,000, 10,000.
Half of Facebook is one big ad now. I mean, when you're scrolling Facebook, if you've caught on to this, it's just ads. It's not even, especially if your dwell time on Facebook is sitting on that ad, they will just keep giving you ads and not giving you a feed of the people that essentially, I don't know if you're on there to watch people.
And what do you think is going to happen now with AI coming through, making it easier for people to make graphics, make it easier for people to write? It's going to go up exponentially again. So it's only going to get harder. There's a content apocalypse coming. It's impossible to break through noise, right? Like it's only going to be the big businesses that have huge ad budgets that are able to like compete at that like commoditization level.
Pablo, I think one thing to touch on this with the point of view, right, is this. People and buyers in B2B, they want to do their own research.
Yep.
They want their own time to do their own research. And that research has changed. I mean, like, if you want to know anything about Rockway, like, you could go to our website. Sure, you could. But with the availability of information out, people are going to watch our LinkedIn. They're going to go to our TikTok. They're going to look at our Instagram. They're going to read our newsletter. They're going to absorb us. Yep. And hopefully one of the messages that they're getting is our point of view. And they're going to say that's who they are. And then it's going to be their decision. Do they want to work with somebody like that? So I think the way buyers consume and the way that they buy now is very, very different. And in marketing, the old adage is that 3% is the bottom of the funnel. 3% are buying right now, right? And that's great. But I think that 97%, they are the ones doing their research, doing their homework. They want information from their peers. They want information. People are getting information from Reddit. They're getting it from Reddit because it's a community of people. It's not pushy. It's not running ads against them. They're looking for that peer-to-peer approval, the information, and they want to educate themselves because they can. So that's where I think, kind of going full circle on this, why the point of view is so important from your company. Again, you don't have to create the point of view. It may not be your job to do that, but go figure out what is it. Ask marketing, CEO, whoever. What's the point of view? And then drive it in the ground.
Yeah, totally. And just as an example, Matt, if you'll just kind of let me land this thing, because I was going exactly there next, right? Like there's all this data that shows that
land the plane. Go ahead.
That this isn't working, right? Consumer behavior has changed. We're going to our peers, right? Like that's what we're doing, right? And at the end of the day, that we're going to our peers because we trust our peers. We trust word of mouth more than anything else. So we need to figure out a way to systemize word of mouth. And we believe that you can. We believe that if you put the right words in people's mouths, right? Like if you sound like everybody else is not going to work, you got to give people a reason to be like, oh, okay, this is why it works for me. If you put it in the right mouths, right? Like not just your sales team, but your other industry experts, your best clients, your partnerships, people around there that are respected, it's going to develop that. And if you create a watering hole, right? If you create the place where people that are wondering whether you're good get to interact with people that really believe you're good and get to listen to those conversations. If you build a community, you're systemizing this word of mouth play, right? So like you can either be doing tricks for clicks or look at me marketing, or you can be building a community, right? And if you're doing the first one, you're building a commodity. If not, you're totally building this moat. So that's our POV, right? So when we talk about the content that you can create from this, right? And what we want you all thinking is, does my company have a point of view, right? Like Matt said, it doesn't have to be, you might not have to have that exact formula written out somewhere, but what is the hill that your company will die on? It can be this idea of the event marketer is underutilized and people are looking at the event marketing wrong and they're overspending and under supporting the people that need to do it. It can be, hey, we've got another client that is a property manager that basically says property management companies make the most when you're in your worst position, when people move out and they got to find somebody new. We make the most when people stay longer, which is better for your property, right? Like that's a big deal. Or the other one is the whole, like, we believe in this cause, Patagonia. We believe in sustainability so much that we're willing to leave profit on the table to make this thing happen. If you're with it, you want to buy our stuff, right? So like what is the thing that you're willing to die on? You got something to add to that, Matt?
Yeah. Well, what I was going to say is I think a lot of people are in seats when you work for a company. Like I said, you probably do not have control over the company's point of view. And Pablo and I understand that completely. So I think you're going to have to be crafty about what you get and from whom. So it doesn't always need to be some point of view that him and I are describing. Your company, it could just be really great messaging. Some companies have incredible messaging. They have one-liners that are just nail it. It just hits it. It's a great single message, and it is who that company is and what they're all about. We're just trying to get your brain turning as to how to leverage the point of view, great messaging, problem you solve, and that empathetic bridge to your customer to leverage it for events.
Love that. So as you're getting your brain turning, we want to get your brain turning on content streams. For us, obviously, the podcast is a very flexible thing that we can do these kinds of things with, and we really believe in it. But you don't have to only think that you have to incorporate this thing into a podcast, right? Like if you have any kind of newsletter, blog, or email list, that is written content that you can incorporate this stuff into. You have any kind of video, you have a training for your clients, you have a YouTube channel or your social media, start thinking about what you have and what you're able to, like, where you're pulling this point of view from and where you're going to inject it into.
Pablo, I think this is a great point of understanding as an event marketer, you have to work laterally. You have to work with sales. You have to work with marketing. You have to work with go-to-market executives, whoever it may be, right? This is a piece where you're working with marketing. I mean, you're going to marketing saying, hey, what's our biggest stream? What's working? What's not? And then you are inevitably going to be able to use event material to help feed that for them, which essentially is giving you buy-in. You always need buy-in as the event marketer. You need it from sales. You need it from leadership. You need it from marketing. The more buy-in you have, the more freed up you get to go execute.
Yeah, good. Really good call, Matt. This is the invaluable perspective that you bring to this thing, man. So then it's, who are the members of the content team, right? In order to do this stuff, you're gonna want to like take inventory of who's planning the stuff, right? Like who is engineering the conversation, who's making this happen, who's gonna do the writing, who's gonna do the editing, who's a subject matter expert, right? The person that's gonna have the interviews, the person that's gonna have these conversations. For this one, we use Matt. He's the CEO, he's the founder, he's the podcast host, because he also knows his stuff with this, right? But like, if you are if you're a security company, it depending on what kind of security, is it cybersecurity? Is it like body security, right? Like you might have like your head of security person, like the number one person in the industry, be your subject matter expert to get into these conversations, depending on who your buyer is. Then you need the person that's going to distribute it, that you're looking at, ish, right? And your graphic designer. That's why Cody's on here also as well. She's a great designer on her team as well as other things, and then we're going to lead this content exercise where everybody takes inventory, where they talk about what kind of content they are already making so that they can start the conversation there with their team, take the roles that are needed and put some names to them, and then start working on like, hey, how do we take what your company talks about and make it into a POV? We don't have time for that here today. We have an hour and a half in Nashville, but just letting you know what the exercise will be. And then we move on to the narrative and the booth piece, which, Matt, this is all you, buddy.
All right. So I touched on this a little bit, but I'd say, so brand experience framework, right? So let me just give you a quick framework. I've talked about this before. Number one is why. It's asking yourself, why are we exhibiting? Why are we here? Why are we at this event? You need a real why. Because we've always gone is not a real why. It could be the why, but it's not a real why, right? Customer. You need a really good breakdown of who your customer or who the customers are, right? Who is exactly at this event that you are engaging? What do they mean to you? And what do you mean to them? You have to have that real understanding. That's two. The third is brand, your brand. What makes you unique? What makes you different? What's your vibe? What's your point of view? Who are you as a company? That's the third. The fourth is going to be goals and objectives. You got to have goals and objectives. So if you have just those four things, your why, your customer, the brand, goals and objectives, if you can dial into those four things, so much is possible to go execute the right way. So now what we're talking about is taking it a step further, and it's saying, okay, themes, concepts, ideas, story, narrative. You're hearing me talk about this ad nauseum. The trade show floor is a sea of parody. It is a bunch of trade show booths that look similar, white background, nice layout, decent structure, a lot of nice trade show booths. The companies that win are the companies that show up with themes, the ones that show up with ideas, the ones that are telling their audience a story about them or a story about their customer that they are seeing empathy in and understanding. So 2 questions I think you want to be asking yourself in this process is, what should people walk away knowing? What do you want your customer after an engagement with you or just walking by? But more so with an engagement, what do you want them to walk away with? Choose one thing. There may be 5. I get it. There's probably 10, but choose one. What is the most important one? If you could have a 30-second conversation with somebody as the most important conversation, what would be that one thing you're going to tell them? And then 2 is, how should they feel? How do you want someone feeling when they leave? Like, I always think about this podcast as an example and this live show. How do I want people to feel when they leave this podcast? And I always think to myself, I want them to think that I give a shit about the information that we are giving to them that it means something, that they can take it and go actionably use it in their life. So that is something that I feel about this podcast, right? So you have to think about that in your trade show booth. How do you want your customer to leave feeling? It could be you just want them leaving feeling happy. You want them feeling like, wow, that's the coolest brand in home security that I've ever seen. Like whatever, just decide what that is. And then with the information that we just kind of walked through, you're building themes, you're building concepts, you're building ideas, you're creating a story. Then you can go design a trade show booth. Stop designing a trade show booth before you have all of this information. And if you're working with somebody that is not asking you this stuff and is start designing you a trade show booth, you're going backwards. You need this information first. The design of the booth then follows. And then that is how you go execute, in my opinion.
I love it, Matt. I don't think you've ever told me this whole idea of you think about this in the podcast all the time, right? Of like, how do you want people to feel? Because it's real, right? Like any kind of engagement that you're doing, whether it's a trade show booth, whether it's a brand experience, I think about it when it comes to whether it's a conversation, right? Like I just think about it when it comes to networking or anything like that. This idea of what should people walk away knowing and how should they feel is the key to empathy, right? Like at the end of the day, at a very base level, everybody wants to feel seen to a certain extent, right? So like, I would say start there, like start like, how do you ensure that they were like, oh, this team, this person, they really get me. They really get us. And then how do you build upon that? And I love, man, I know that I've said this in past podcasts, but this idea when it comes specifically to trade show booth and brand experience strategy, this idea of person needs to process all this visual information, be like, and then walk up to someone and be like, what's the deal with this thing?
Yeah.
And engineering it so that the deal with this thing is that point of view we just worked on. That to me really feels like, man, you're really doing it at a black belt level, man.
I think what you're talking about, I think this is like utopia to me. And I hope this happens for somebody, right? Is essentially your customer walks into your exhibit space and they're talking with somebody and they're like, hey, why is your booth a carnival theme? Why are you Barnum's and Bailey? Why are you this theme? It's a great question. You're eliciting curiosity. You're garnering attention. You're standing out by somebody walking in your booth and asking you, why are you a tequila bar? Why are you a carnival circus? Like whatever the theme is, it's gaining attention. It's standing out. There's so much going on. And the utopian, like the big goal is to be able for the answer as to the why has to do with the problem that you solve for them. So they are like, oh, that's awesome. That makes sense. And I think that's easier said than done. But to me, it's the goal. To me, it should be the goal. And again, a lot of people go to trade shows, people know who they are, right? So you're not going to get people being like, oh, why are you this? But you still may, even if someone knows who you are. Like I had people that I know in our industry say to me, Matt, why is your guys' booth? What's Hotel Rockway? That's what everybody kept saying. What's Hotel Rockway? And I was like, oh, funny you should ask. And I would say, hey, it's a boutique hotel, a boutique experience, right? Right. And you jump into the spiel, intentional design, personalized. I mean, what do you get at a boutique hotel? They are always intentionally designed. They're a little wacky. They're a little different. They're niche. They're specific, right? So it's that intentional design. And for us, if someone says, what's intentional design? I just start walking them through story, theme, narrative. We are not just going to design you something just to design it. Right. And then you go to personalized service. I would hope that a boutique hotel had personalized service. They're typically less number of rooms, smaller hotels, yada, yada, yada. So
what's the last piece of that moniker? Because I think it's just as important, man. It was intentional design, personalized service.
And the sleepless nights.
And no sleepless nights.
The experience. It's getting the experience at a hotel like that. Yeah, that's a good point.
It's the idea that as an event marketer, all you're doing is stressing out all day long. If we can take this idea, is the booth going to look beautiful off your plate? You can sleep well. That is your client being seen, being heard.
Yeah.
Right. So like, to me, that idea of like intentional design, that's about you. Personalized service, it's about us. And then no sleepless nights. That's like, oh man, if I got that at a conference, that's what I want as an event marketer for sure. And we say this
Pablo, let's go.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying it doesn't have to be utopia, right? I was just thinking that, did you want to talk through all these? Because we only have about like 21
What I
minutes.
want to do, let's do Security Central, and then we got 2 questions. We'll jump into Q&A. Security Central is a good example of this in terms of how we created a theme, how we created, it's an idea, it's a concept, right? I mean, Security Central is a company that does call monitoring, right? So when you call ADT and your alarm goes off at home, they're the call center, right? And through our conversations with them, the actual slogan is protect. I think it's protect what you value. It's on the underside of the booth there. You can see it's called protect what you value. So they are a business that has kind of quietly been in this industry for a very long time. They are a bit of a household name. They are very well known. So it wasn't like we needed to come out and make some big splash or surprise, but they did do typically pretty conventional style trade show booths. They wanted to solidify themselves as the person that does this. And they wanted to see the home protection, protect what you value, right? Everybody values their home, their family, what's inside those walls. So this one was like a no-brainer. I mean, we sketched this out for them on a piece of paper and with like a TP roof and building out a house with windows. The windows were graphics that like saw your family inside the house and stuff. And it was just a home run for them. And the difference of them exhibiting the year prior in what I would consider a conventional trade show booth to this, after they exhibited, when we did our debrief call, so much was like, just people were like, oh, wow. Like just people coming up and asking questions. Why were you doing a house? This looks amazing. It just garnered so much attention and opened up more conversation as to why they built their booth as a house. That's all.
Love it, man. Love it. All right, let's get into these questions. Yeah. So Jesse Rittenhouse, he's asking, do you do both a brand experience theme, focused booth?
I got the question.
And set up a podcast at your booth, or do you suggest just focusing on one or the other?
So great question, Jesse. And I would suggest both, right? I mean, I think, so we're going to get into, if we ever get there, the podcast play and why it's such a good play in your booth. I would say, A, it's because you get to talk to your customers. You get to invite them in to have conversations, right? It's not very salesy. It's a softer sell. A lot of people want to be heard. They want to have industry conversation, but I would say both. And in ours, it just so happened to work that once we came up with Hotel Rockway, it was like, oh, well, how sick would it be to make the booth look like the podcast was just being shot in the middle of the lobby? Yeah. So I think anywhere you do it, for example, if Security Central, this booth we're looking at here, wanted to do it, we would probably set up a living room setting that looked like a podcast. Yeah. So that like they were recording the podcast in the living room. Yeah. Part of the idea is to make sure that it's out in the open because you want people to see camera, lights, action, things happening. People get curious in that sense. But I am a huge proponent of theme, ideas, and concepts. I think every trade show booth should.
Yeah, Jesse, just so I know Jesse, right? Jesse is a marketer that handles, he's like I don't know if his title is CMO, but he's head of basically growth for his company. And we're talking about this idea of theme first because it needs to marry, right? Like this idea, like we're talking about two different things. The theme of the booth needs to invite a conversation, but then it's like, how do you take the person that asks a question to, yo, let's go deep, let's engage, right? The podcast is the engagement. While this, like all the stuff we're talking about right now is the thing that will get them, you know, believing that this is worth it and not just some like dog and pony show that you're doing that doesn't really mean anything. So that's what you want to think about there. You want to have both. Shayna Thomas says, any thoughts about when your booth gets backed up? Example, in security industry, people want to see a demo or a snippet of a demo. Traffic comes in waves and you often don't have to lose attention while they are there, but your demo areas are full. Ideas?
Yep. So, okay. It's a really good question. Okay. So A, it's a good problem to have, Shayna, right? B, it would be part, as the person running the booth, it would be part of my notes, my log for the week. How many times did this happen? What were the certain time frames in which it happened? Was it after lunch, before lunch, morning? I would get all those notes because I think inevitably in the future, you're talking about, does this setup have to be adjusted, right? In the moment, there's not a ton that you can do. If you get overrun, bombarded in the setup, there's really not a ton that you're going to be able to do in that moment besides deploying people to go talk to people, right? You got to get boots on the ground, people talking to people. Hey, what are you here for? Are you looking for a demo? Some ideas that I would have if, say, this happens every time and you cannot get bigger space or adjust your space to work accordingly, it's just a part of the nature, is I would look into some serious appointment booking, right? Kind of that, I don't want to say that scarcity model, but basically saying like, hey, we only have X amount of appointments. We get overrun. So you're trying to then in advance book an appointment, or if somebody comes up, say, hey, we are packed. You have a person designated saying we're packed. We want to get to you. We want to have this conversation. Can I book you for later time, and using like a booking system type thing? But my overarching thought is make note of it while it's happening. And then you are problem solving down the line for what does the future setup look like to accommodate this based on timing, based on number of people. And I hope that's helpful.
Cool. All right, Matt, let's try to get through a little bit more of the
Yeah,
presentation. So once we have this narrative, once we have the point of view that you understand that you're going to make content based on this point of view, you have the narrative figured out. This is the one we always get. You got to get the butts in seats, right? Like, how do you execute actually having people there? Matt, you want to talk a little bit about this piece on the pre-show marketing side?
Yeah. So butts in the seat. This is something that gets brought up all the time on the show. You're going to the show, you're getting there, you have engagements, dinners, booth, podcast, spinning wheel things, whatever you have, you want people there. So my number one thing as an event marketer for people that are trying to execute these booths and strategies is you have to be so aligned with sales. You need to get sales buy-in. They are going to help you get the butts in the seat, right? They are going to help drive people there. You cannot do it by yourself. Marketing cannot do it by themselves, right? So I would be getting, again, we talked earlier about alignment across the board. You need buy-in from sales. What does sales need? What do they want out of this? They want leads. They want to close deals. So you're going to have to convey to them that, hey, if you have people in your pipeline that are cold, that are stalled out, that maybe you've never even spoke to before, we have this really cool offer. They're going to be there in person. Let's reach out to them. Let's get them in the seat. I'll get you face to face. My number one thing with getting butts in the seats at your trade show stuffs and getting people to book meetings, demos, dinners is utilizing your sales team. They are already stalking these people. They're already doing it. They have the fast track. You don't have to start from scratch.
Yeah. And listen, I think Shayna bringing up that question was like perfect timing, right? Because you're going to have demos, you're going to have the product stuff. This idea of a podcast is just another seat for sales to like have a shot to grab a butt, right? And it's
a great offering, Pablo.
It's a great offer.
It's a great offering to say, hey, we're having a podcast at our trade show booth. I know you're going to be at the show. We would love to hear from you on X topic.
Yep.
We feel like you'd be a great whatever. Boom. Boom. Yeah. Invite. It's another way of garnering interest and getting people to just come meet you face to face.
Yeah, totally. And the reason why we put the who side of it is because, you know, if you only have a demo, you only have a product thing, you also are going to have existing clients there, right? So this idea that like giving them multiple levels of like people to think about, right? The attendee into pipeline might be demo, might just be a conversation, might be podcast, pipeline to client, right? Like, hey, you already know about us. You don't need another demo, but let's have a conversation about how you're trying to achieve your goals here. That can help elevate them. And then the existing client to evangelist, now you're really cooking with fire when you're making a podcast with a client that is talking about like, A, how smart they are, and B, how they use your product now that you know I'm really, really smart, right? So that really, really helps a lot. And the way we did it is it's nothing sexy. It's get after it, right? Like if you've been to the show before, this year at Exhibitor Live, we were there last year. We have people that were passed on the podcast. We have people that engaged with us before. We're reaching out to them. Last year, as soon as they dropped that show app, we were in there. Matt, me, sales team, Cody. We were all in there DMing people. Hey, do you want to come to this dinner? Do you want to come to the podcast? It's all part of like an engagement that's a low ask. Obviously post on social media. You know, you want to create like a simple booking system. You want to create collateral. We're making flyers of like our dinner, of a karaoke night that we're going to host. Just like give people stuff to share. You know, don't just post on social media and send an email out. Like literally reach out to people and get them in. But the more attractive the offer, the better, right?
I think in a way it goes back to what we talked about earlier about where is your content stream. Not everybody has 6 strong content streams. They probably have 1 or 2 that are really big for them. So where is your audience? Do you have an incredible newsletter? Go to marketing. Say, hey guys, like where are you really thriving? Where do we have our biggest audience list? I got to get some of these people at the show. How do you craft a message to them, right? So it's understanding what is the medium that you are connecting to with people. Is it a newsletter? Is it through sales? Is it LinkedIn? Is it LinkedIn? Is it ads? Is it what is it? And you got to be able to get that message out there and utilize the people inside of your company these good relationships you have, this lateral discussions to drive people to the booth and to your engagement. Sorry.
Yeah. And the podcast is just the easiest ask out of all of those things in general, right? Like it's almost as good as a VIP dinner for a free meal, but they're getting more of those. So you'll be really unique if you use the podcast. So now let's talk about actually running the show, right? Like there is basic roles. There is the prepper role, right? Like Matt, do you want to talk about the value of the prepper?
The value of the prepper.
Yeah.
You were an incredible prepper at our show. So when we were running the podcast activation in our booth, we essentially had somebody booked every 30 minutes. I think it was, or every 20 minutes. There was a little bit of a gap, but these run wrong. Pablo was the kind of the producer, prepper. He was greeting people that we had booked to come over. Hey, like you have to greet them. You have to say hello. You have to make them feel welcome. You have to loosen them up. Say, hey, here's what the conversation is going to look like. Matt will be done in a minute. And then you intro, here's kind of what you're going to be asking. You got to warm them up and get them comfortable. So I think that this is a role you have to have at your company. It could be anybody. I mean, Pablo is literally like a puppy, right? Like just everyone likes him.
A Labrador.
Everybody. Yes, he's like a Labrador. So like you have to find that person, and then they just need to be, hey, are you Jeff? Are you Megan? You're up next. I'm Rick. I'm Jane. Hey, I'm here to, you need that person to prep and get them ready.
So we originally had put producer, but we wanted to like expand that definition to this like prepper, right? Like who is your golden retriever? Who's gonna greet everybody with a wagging tail, right? Like I'm not a puppy, I'm a grown ass dog, but I got a wagging tail all the time. All right, that audio visual, right? Like who's the camera person? You don't have to have a full-time editor, full-time camera person to do this. My trick is I have my assistant spend, a month prior, look through LinkedIn and look through Instagram in that area to find somebody that's making beautiful video content that may or may not have a video production business, and I hire them for the day. That way they show up, they have the camera, they have the lights, they have all the audio, they have everything that you need, right? So you can outsource this thing. Then you're going to need an editor to talk about the GIFs and the follow-up and all that stuff. That's getting progressively easier thanks to Descript and other softwares that are making just about everybody be able to be an editor. And then you need the interviewer. You need the subject matter expert. They're less interested to talk to a salesperson than they are to talk to a peer or to talk to somebody that's like really interesting for them, right? Like this is an opportunity for influencer marketing, right? Like we just had Geraldine on the show. She's trying to do an influencer campaign. I told her, I was like, hey, Geraldine, run this kind of play and invite influencers to make content with you and be the interviewee and meet all these other people that they want in their audience, right? So like many, many different ways to do this thing. Finally, then the things to actually prep, who's the prepper needs to be prepping, the interview script, right? Like we talk about this idea that the conversation needs to be about 60% about them, right? Like, hey, what problem do you solve? What have you learned about this problem? What makes it unique is kind of like the thing that we use for that bucket. 20% about the show. What brings you to the show, right? That makes the show want to be your ally, right? You're making all this different content of why people come to Exhibitor Live, why people come to HIMSS, why people come to the different things that you're coming to. That makes them real happy to see that. And then that last 20% about you. So how does all this intersect with what we do here, right? That gives you the content that you need to then have a good follow-up to do these kinds of things. And you're not just self-promoting the whole time. Then you want to create this like social template so that you can have an editor that can like clip it really easily and put it into however you're going to put it so that you can share it. You got to create a file sharing system so that you're like, we use Google Drive, right? Like you can send somebody just a link to the Google Drive or Dropbox or whatever you need. And then finally, like a scheduling link that's going to give them that gets their phone number. You want to get on text with folks. I think it was Shayna that was talking about having a problem getting people to show up, right? So like give them something on their calendar that says, hey, at 11:30 on Tuesday, you're going to be the star of this show. Be there at 11:30. And the interview actually starts at 11:40, right? So that they're definitely going, you're in contact with them. And then finally, just a couple of things, having done this a bunch of times, is the extra mile. And that's this idea that when we were in Exhibitor Live, we had the camera guy, he brought all this stuff. He's like, man, space looks really well lit. Do we need any more? I brought this like giant freaking light over here. Do you actually want me to set this up? I'm like, yeah, dog, set that thing up. Because the more stuff, the more lights, the more action, the more people stop to be there, right? When I say camera, obviously you're going to have a camera recording this thing. But what I do every single time that we're doing it, I take a picture of them while they're being interviewed with my phone. And that picture, if you zoom it in right, it looks like they were just like on a TV show. It looks like they were just like in some kind of like big thing and you're like, oh my God, look how great this looks. Do you want me to text it to you? Now you got their number for the follow-up, right? So like just sending them that picture from the actual interview is a huge move for the extra mile. Finally, our big trick, our content trick is the fact that my team is in the Philippines and we have great editors and great graphic designers there. So by the time that they're done by the interview, I upload that thing to the cloud. My team then wakes up the next morning, edits a micro snippet that we have ready for the next morning, and the salesperson gets to follow up with that number that I got because I took the picture of them and say, hey, we made this 1.5 minute clip of you looking like an expert. Don't you want to share this thing on LinkedIn? Here's how I would share it. And boom, they're sharing it online. You're winning the conference in person and online. And finally, it's the space. Like one of the things, if you can have it really well designed, really cool, awesome. The minimum viable product for the space, people ask me this all the time. Get one of these like step and repeat things, like one of those things that you can buy at FedEx Kinko's, and don't just put your company logo on it. You want something that people would be willing to like take a picture next to, even if they weren't podcasting. So, what we've done in the past is be like thought leaders of XYZ conference with the company logo all around it. But the big thing says thought leaders of XYZ conference or disrupting industry Y. Right. And then your logo all around it. But you want people to be able to take a picture of that thing, not just it be about your company, or you can have a super cool design space like Matt did, which is also works. So this is just kind of examples of, I'm not going to show this, but these are just examples that we'll show of the videos that we made for YouTube, of the micro content segments. This is what I mean by the social media clip, right? Like we had created already this frame. We had created all these intros, so we could just plop in 1.5 minutes of this video and send it to someone. And now let's talk about getting stakeholder buy-in, Matt.
Yeah. So stakeholder buy-in, to me, we've touched on it kind of as we've gone through this, right? So laterally, you need marketing support. You need sales support. You're in events. You either have a boss, you are that boss, and you have a team. You need everybody's kind of buy-in here. And we didn't even include the executives on this piece with leadership. I think that really comes with more so getting results, tracking results, and then bringing those results to them. But marketing, I mean, potentially by running a podcast or some sort of speaking webinar-ish engagement that you record inside your trade show booth, you're going to have the ability to give your marketing team 6 months plus of content. A lot of the stuff that Pablo talked about, repurposing content, video editing, your company may be big enough where you have the people that can do this. Your marketing department, you bring them this idea. They may be like, hold on a second. And they may be ready to do this with you. They may think this is incredible. So a lot of that repurposing, the video editing, the social media clips, if you have alignment there, you're good to go. I think where you may end up having an issue is if they don't really understand it. Now you got to kind of sell this buy-in on what they would do with this content. But it's 2024. I think it's pretty inevitable that they have some form of content stream where this content would work. Sales, you are giving them differentiated follow-up, right? It's not houndy. It's not an aggressive sales. It's just a softer approach, right? As Pablo mentioned, you're able to send someone a clip and say, hey, great job on the podcast. Thank you so much for stopping by. Oh, by the way, we ran through this demo as well because, Shayna was asking about how to keep people coming back for demos, right? So you're having that discussion as a salesperson. There's more leverage there. There's a more meaningful engagement. I think I just so much like that it's more a softer sell. I do. I think it's tough to stand there on the floor and be asking people for, hey, asking someone to be on a podcast is a pretty easy ask. It's just not a difficult ask at all. So you're able to reach out to those prospects that maybe you were struggling with to reach out to because they think you just want to sell them something. In your event team, I think it depends on the event team, but if you're talking meaningful conversations, right? You want to create buzz at your booth. I've always have people ask that. How do you create buzz at the booth? We want to, right? You want to garner attention. You want to stand out. Having a podcast studio-ish, as we said, a makeshift one built into your booth with cameras and people, microphones and conversations going on will create buzz. 100% guaranteed. Even if you're not busy, you look busy 24/7 on the show floor the whole time. It looks important. It feels important. I think it's then up to you to make it important with the conversations, right? Like I felt we had a lot of buzz at our booth. We had people coming up, looking, watching what's going on there. I felt this need to drive this really good conversation because we were garnering this attention. It gives you a really good reason to pre-market yourself. It gives you a good reason to go to marketing and your sales team. You're giving them options for succeeding, right? You're kind of reaching across the aisle there. And I think the last one saying it looks like media, it does. I mean, yeah, looks like you're operating as a media team.
Really good question here by Dia, past star of the show, Dia Kelly. Can the live conversation / podcast be heard on the show floor? Not across several booths, of course, but if someone is passing by and trying to listen, can they hear it? This was something I was supposed to talk about earlier that I missed. Matt, what's your answer to that question?
So the answer is yes. I think where a lot of people, Pablo and I have discussed this, we've seen people do podcasts in their booths where they do it in an enclosed room. I think you're losing so much value by doing it in an enclosed room to control the noise. I mean, with the technology and microphones nowadays, you can accomplish it. Plus, you want it to sound busy. You want it to sound like you are somewhere. You want it to sound like you're at a convention center hall. And the answer is, depending where you put this, where you put the setup. We had people, yes, standing in the aisle listening to the conversation. You can hear it. They can't be 50 feet away and hear it. And depending then again, how big your space is, you could amplify it as long as you're being respectful of your neighbors to a degree right there. So if you have a large space, you could amplify more. If you have a small space like we did as a 10 by 30, you don't really need to.
Yeah. Dia, I'll die on this hill. And I'll say that when you are running this thing, because we've been doing this since like 2019. I've done it with way more amateur people than Matt, right? Like this is really like the best execution we've done so far. And I thought it blended everything well together. And what the constant conversation that I have is, hey, how do we like get this out on the show floor? How do we live stream it? Or wait a minute, but is the audio going to sound like I'm like at this thing, or is it going to sound like I'm on the radio? And, my answer to that is you are at a trade show. You are on the show floor. This thing is an engagement technique. Forget everything else that isn't, deprioritize everything else that isn't inviting engagement, bring it in, right? Like the idea that the folks that are going to gather around, they're probably not going to hear it very well. If you're projecting, it might upset the trade show attendee. What I would tell you is people are going to gather around. If they want to hear it, you have somebody on the floor that's like, hey, we have this playlist already on YouTube. If you want to see what these conversations are about, you can subscribe to it. We can send it to you. We can do these kinds of things. If you are publishing this thing on your podcast, we publish it on our podcast. You hear conversations in the background, but people know that this is live. It's the same reason that you have bought a live album of your favorite band at some point, and you don't expect it to sound like the in-booth album, right? Like it's just a different experience. Behind this question, what I hear is like, prioritize the folks that are like the folks that are going to have that conversation. The conversation is the most valuable, right? Like this idea that they get 15 to 20 minutes of uninterrupted time of feeling heard, feeling made special, talking to the person that you most want them to talk to in your company. Second is make sure that you have people around the booth that when people are like stopping by to be like, well, can I listen? What's going on here? They can explain it and they can tell them, oh, if you want to hear more X, if you want to be a part of the show, Y, go talk to the Labrador, those kinds of things. And then after all that, think about like, how does this thing play to everywhere else, right? Just like really optimize for the engagement as opposed to the audio or anything else.
So Pablo, two things I'm seeing here. Yeah. So one thing I'm seeing is Dia saying that they ran a podcast last year in the booth, but no one could hear the conversation, wanting to sort of expel on that. Dia, I'd have to talk to you about like your exhibit size, the layout, the positioning of everything, right? Because I think this is something you want front and center. And, as I said, depending on the size, it's about where you position it and can you amplify it with your neighbors. But essentially, if you can create some lights, camera, action, a little bit of a stage, a little bit of an atmosphere and build it in, because if you just have a table and chairs and some microphones, I don't necessarily think you're going to garner the attention you want. If you look at the pictures of the booth that we did as a 10 by 30 as an example, you can see lights, camera, action. I mean, it's a setup. I mean, we literally had 100 square feet of our booth. There were cameras, there were chairs, everything was angled towards it. So I think you have to create that. And then essentially, like I said, depending on the area, It's really all dictated on your booth space, but you have to build it so essentially it garners attention. People can see what's going on.
Yeah, Dia, yeah, correct. I hadn't read your message. So last year, but no one could hear the conversation. I'm not sure if you are talking about, thanks for more info on the actual logistics of the podcast. Yeah. If you're talking about like the two people having the conversation can't hear each other, big problem. Right.
Yeah, that's a problem. I don't think that's what she's saying.
I don't think that that's what you're talking about. If you're talking about once you publish the podcast, you can't really hear it. That's a problem too. It's got to be audible, but it can have some background noise because people know that they're listening to something live. You can handle that with, I would say that's an AV problem, right? Like make sure that when you are hiring the photographer, cameragrapher person, that you're like, hey, this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
Bring some lav mics because I want people to have it on their person, and bring some, like maybe you can bring some overhead mics, maybe you can bring some directional mics, right? Like at Exhibitor Live, I don't know if you can see it in this picture, but we did have an overhead mic capturing the conversation, and we had lavaliers on. At other ones that we've done, we've had these microphones that are just very directional. Like if I talk in this microphone here, you hear me. If I talk over here, you hear me way less, right? So if you can, but then you need the stands and you need it to be able to like come up to someone's mouth. In other shows, we've done the lav mics and just had the directional mics as a prop, right? But at the end of the day, like you gotta capture that audio so that it's at least understandable for the podcast. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then beyond that, like I just really wouldn't worry too much about like, can the people standing around the booth listen to it, because it's more of a reason to be like, we can send this to you. This is a great follow-up mechanism.
I agree with everything Pablo just said. And I think I don't want to say make a spectacle of it, but you want this to be an attraction. Make it, Pablo's company is called Be the Stage. You want to make this a stage. That's what you're looking to do. You're imagining, you want the podcast to be a main engagement inside of your booth, right? So that people are drawn to it and they want to know what's going on. I also saw here. So, just want to say, I mean, we have some great information in this chat that's scrolling through. It's really good to see everybody engaging. I see people wanting to connect on LinkedIn. That's really a big piece of this, right? Is how do you form community? How can you all help each other as well? Also, Shazia asked a question earlier. It said, how are booths tracking quality engagements and leads? So Shazia, what I would say is this: there are a lot of softwares and lead track softwares. And in particular, they have the ability to put variables into what those engagements were like, right? So when you have a lead, you are then able to put more personalized information. You can grade the lead. Say, I remember Shayna saying earlier, they're trying to do as many demos as possible. Well, they should be tracking those demos, how many were done, who were they done with, and then were they graded from A to D? And what does A, B, C, and D mean? Because it means you can move quick. It means you can get in there. And if you just gave a demo, go in and say, add in, Jessica X demo, give it an A. And then if you have time, put notes. But if you can't, just give it an A. And that lets you know quality. What was our average demo? Was it a B? Was it a C? Was it a D? Was it an A? You have to have these qualitative ways of giving yourself information afterwards. The results will speak for themselves, but that's a great question. Like, how good was the engagement? Well, the results will tell you how good anything was. But in that moment, during the days, yes, love what Dia just said. Sales assistant, having somebody, if you are so busy, and we have done this before, I've suggested this before, if you are so busy, have somebody, get an intern, get an assistant, get anybody to do it. Geez, I would do it with my own company if I had to do it. If there is so much going on, give them an iPad, give them the CRM, Excel, whatever you want, have them just cooking around, talking to people and filling in those notes. Go to the salespeople, go to the people doing demos, and make their life easy for them.
This chat is incredible, Matt. Does this level of chat happen in all your shows these days? This is awesome.
I would say that this is probably the best chat I've seen, but at the last couple weeks, the chat I'd say the last 4 or 5 shows, the chat is getting better. There's more regular people that are contributing and talking and communicating and bringing great ideas to the table. So
I love it. I'm gonna hit what Shaz is saying here in the Q&A, but I just want to say this one's a little bit different because we wanted to get through the presentation, obviously, right? Like I know you do a really good job of engaging with people. Because I listen to every show. I'm like the biggest fan of you, like talking to people. But this is exactly it. And I showed that testimonial slide because obviously at the end of this we're gonna be like, subscribe to our podcast, which you all obviously are already. But if you haven't, we could really use a review. And we love these testimonials. Matt's received a bunch of emails in the last 3 weeks of people like getting real good career advice. And we really appreciate getting this stuff. And it feels like the flywheel is really turning. So thank you all for being here. Shazia Razak, who's asking, podcasters have been taking over the event space and have a dedicated area at trade shows. Do you think it may be overkill to have a podcast, especially if everyone begins to look the same? Let me jump in this, Matt, and I want to hear your opinion on what I'm about to say. Shazia, I could see that happening. I think it's starting to happen more and more of this thing coming to. I have 2 thoughts on it. One is it really depends on what industry you're at, right? Because some are starting to do it. I go to a lot of conferences where I don't see a single one. And every time we've ever done it, we've really stood out. So I think that there's still space in the majority of these conferences. The other thing that I'll tell you is that this podcaster area, these different things, that's why we wanted to really include the details in this presentation. That wasn't just like, hey, how do you set this thing up? Because most people are thinking about this wrong. Most people are thinking, how do I create this show that brings me attention while I'm there? Or how do I produce my podcast and make it sound beautiful, but just do it at a show? What we're talking about is different. What we're talking about is optimizing for it as an engagement, not just audience, not just audio, engagement. Right? Like, how do you set this thing up in a way that gets your whole team behind it? They all have a role. They know what they're doing. Whenever people are walking up, you're creating this perfect journey and you're creating all these little like nuggets of things that allow you to follow up and look better and have people show up, be like, wow, this is really for me. This isn't for you. This is for me. This is wonderful. Right? So like pay attention to those things. And if you continue leaning into that part, no, I don't think you're going to look or feel the same if you do that stuff, because most people do not understand that piece.
Yeah, Shaz, I think it's a great question. And I think what it leads me back to is the value that running a podcast, speaking engagement, that you video, whatever, webinar, panel discussion, podcast discussion, however you want to run it in your booth, get people talking, film and record it, and make a big deal out of it while you're there, right? And I think what it comes down to is, I can tell you from having run it, one of the best pieces that goes into this, there's so many value points for the people running it, right? One of the value points is you get to talk to your customer for a whole week. You get to interview them. Most of the conversations you have, people are like, hey, who are you? What's your name? Oh yeah, what do you do? Where are you from? This is like, you bypass that. You're getting information from your customer. What are you worried about? What are you struggling with right now? What's your biggest triumph in the last 6 months? What direction are you pushing in? What are your thoughts on this that's going on in our industry? You're getting all this great information from your customer in a very non-salesy setting. You're interviewing them, getting their knowledge, their expertise. So I think that is a huge value point. The other is, I think podcasts that are activating at the trade show on the floor, they're media. It's media and it's around the industry. This should be specific to you. And it should be specific to your customer. It should be intimate. It should be conversations that you both want to have to get to know each other. And then, of course, there's a lot of other value when it comes to your sales team. It comes to the content you put out over the next 6 months that makes you look like an industry leader. And honestly, if you're going through this effort to have the conversation, you don't look like an industry thought leader. You are. You're hosting the conversation. So I think there's so much value in it.
Yeah, and she says, she's putting here in the Q&A, 6-minute podcast seem to be the soundbite with 3 key questions. Shazia, I agree that seems to be it. Have you ever been a part of that? Like I've been invited to these like, hey, 5-minute thing. I'm just going to ask you the same thing and you're just going to like move it along, pal. It kind of sucks, right? It's cool for me on some of them because I'm just like, yeah, all right, cool. I got to say something and you're going to give me a clip that looks cool, but I don't necessarily feel heard in a 6-minute kind of like 3 question
Pablo,
pump and run.
Most of the ones that we did, you were
15 to
like
20.
looking at me. You were looking at me going like this, like wrap it up, let's go. Cause I just got lost. I just was getting our ideal customer in a conversation, and you just start pulling, and you just have these, like I said, if it's meaningful, if you're not like, you can't just stage this to stage it in terms of bullshit, right? Like it is a play, it is a strategy, but you still have to do it authentically. You still have to be like, what do you want? What does your customer want to talk about? What is an important conversation to have? For example, when I was at Exhibitor last year, a lot of the conversations that I was having with people, you know, wasn't Shazia exactly, or Shayna, or anyone that was here, but it was people doing the exact job you were in, was talking about measurement. It was talking about how to measure their trade show results. It was talking about how to create more experiential activations. It was conversation that mattered to them. And then I got to learn about where they are struggling, where they need help, where they are curious. And then I got to engage in that discussion. So I honestly found that like 15, 20 minutes was good conversations, and I was having to be pulled away from the discussion.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Right. Like in the past, our average is about 15 minutes, right? Like 10 to 15 minutes. That framework that I told you of, like, what problem do you solve? How'd you find out it was a problem? What have you learned since? What brought you here? And how does it interact with what we're doing? Really good template for you to like have a 10, 15-minute conversation. I remember for Exhibitor Live, because Matt already had so much insight into the industry, we engineered it a little bit differently, right? Like the question was kind of like, hey, you know, we know that event marketers come to Exhibitor Live for education. So it's like, what did you want to learn the most here? What do you wish people were talking about more that you still haven't heard about, right? Like
that was a great question, by the way. What do you wish people were talking more about? That was a very good question.
What are you struggling with right now the most? What is the coolest thing you've ever pulled off, so they can brag on like what they're doing? And, you know, like, and then there was another smattering of those things, right? But like opening it up that way, in a way that allows them to like, you know, really kind of align with you in a way. And once you get into, there were some people that came there to like talk about themselves. Matt moved them along in 10, 15 minutes. There were other folks that got into really meaty conversations, and you spent a half an hour, 45 minutes with those folks. I can't blame you for it, man. As the Labrador, I'm just like handling it in the background. I'm just like, hey, don't worry, just stick around a little longer. Let me get some water. But like, you know, like this thing is for that. It is to build relationships, right? It's less about building content and more about building relationships. So I would really like, be very wary of just like, hey, I just got 3 questions. You ready? Because yes, that can be used for proprietary data, right? Like if you ask 50 people the same 3 questions, you can create a thought piece around it, but it's not going to make 30 friends or 50 friends, right? Like making 10 really good friends at a trade show or really good leads in your pipeline, to me, is worth the $50,000 spend. And like, you know, like one content piece about it isn't. Jesse puts, I think the key is in the chat. He's saying, I think the key is trying to schedule interviews ahead of time. When people see you actively interviewing, they come by. Jesse, that's massive. The key is to have like a third to half of your schedule filled, 80% of the first day, right? Like
with
80%
some flexibility
of the first day,
for day 2 or 3.
Yeah, absolutely. 80% of the first day full, maybe 25 to 40% of the second day full. And then after that, it's ground and pound and get more people into it, right? So like you want to have that locked in.
Great show today. Super grateful for everybody that came in, interested in our class, what we're presenting. The chat was electric. Awesome today. Really cool seeing people make connections, exchanging ideas. Hopefully, if anybody's going to be at Exhibitor Live, I hope you are taking our class. I hope you will reach out to me, reach out to Pablo, reach out to Cody. Let us know you will be there. We will get together. We are hosting a dinner on Sunday night. So if you are going and you're going to be at Exhibitor Live, message us, let us know. We will make sure you get invited and hopefully be able to see you there. I believe I think Mandy just said one of her most valuable hours of my week. Mandy, honestly, that makes my day. That's really great to hear. And that's our goal, right? So that's a wrap, everybody. Another episode of Event Marketing Redefined. Pablo, thank you. Everybody, thank you. And we will catch you next time. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.